Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It is finally here. Shane Beamer, the South Carolina Gamecocks, kicking off spring practice on Wednesday. We've talked extensively about this football program going into spring practice, and it's one of the most exciting teams that you see in the country going into spring practice. Where, look, we have extremely high expectations regarding what this South Carolina team can be going into the 2025 year. I look at this depth chart that we have in front of us and say, to me, this is a college football playoff caliber roster that South Carolina has going into 2025. But at the same time, we got a decent amount of question marks about this South Carolina team, specifically on the defensive side of the football, that during spring practice, we're probably going to get some answers in terms of, hey, who are going to be the difference makers for this South Carolina program going into 2025. Want to go through some, I think, what I would call bold predictions for South Carolina as they start spring practice. Got some breakout players that I think we should be keeping an eye on. I also got some position changes that I think are intriguing to monitor as well for South Carolina. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the South Carolina fans, look, if you're a South Carolina fan that is talking spring ball, listening to spring ball in the middle of March, I know dang well that y'all have some bold predictions as well. Let it fly in the comment section. The South Carolina fans, the amount of support y'all have shown the fellas over the last couple of weeks and months has been absolutely amazing. Going to be a really fun team to talk about over the next couple of weeks. And something I love about Shane Beamer, he's going to be transparent with us. He's going to give us a lot to talk about over the next couple of weeks, where you can't say that for a lot of other head coaches in college football across the country. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start with, just kind of some overall thoughts that we have talked about over the last couple of weeks. And, Shane Beamer got up in his press conference yesterday, talked about some very similar things. And I think the biggest message that I got from Shane Beamer is, sometimes as college football fans, when we're sitting here in March looking at, hey, what teams can be really good in the upcoming college football season, we oftentimes look at returning production as a key metric. And oftentimes that can be an accurate way to evaluate a team going into a college football season, but it's not always the best way. And for South Carolina, I feel like the narrative around this football team heading into 2025 is they got gutted on the defensive side of the football. A ton of guys that have played a lot, that have played a lot of good football, are now going to the NFL. And all of a sudden, we just don't think this defense is going to be any good in 2025. Now, I'm not saying I don't have question marks about this defense, because we certainly do. And we're going to talk about some of those question marks. But at the same time, you look at how this South Carolina football team is built. They got a lot of young guys that have some big time potential that, yeah, we have not seen play a ton of football, but we know can be really good football players. Guess what I'm trying to say, and I think what Shane Beamer was trying to say too, is yes, there are a lot of unknown commodities as we sit in the middle of March, specifically on the defense. That does not mean that this defense just isn't going to be good in 2025. And I think the second thing is, I continue to look at this depth chart and kind of play around with what I think it's going to look like. And the word that continues to come to my head is depth. That this has to be the deepest South Carolina team that Shane Beamer has had. Both on the offense and at times in the defensive side of the football, you're looking at it and saying, feel really good about what the 2 or 3 deep looks like for South Carolina, which is just not something we've said about South Carolina over the last couple of years under Shane Beamer. You have your star talent. You have guys like Dylan Stewart. You have guys like Lenore Sellers, but you're also a really deep football team, which I think matters, especially in spring, as you're going to see a ton of position battles play out for South Carolina. Going into my first bold prediction, keep an eye on Brady Hunt. Now, I want to talk about Brady Hunt before we talk about the tight end position. Brady Hunt is a very intriguing cat when you dive into the background. He was a quarterback coming out of high school, went to the MAC, was a quarterback his freshman year, made the transition to the tight end position his redshirt freshman year, in 2022, very new to the tight end position, caught for over 400 yards, 5 touchdowns, was an extremely impressive tight end. Year two playing the position, year two not only as a college football player, but year two playing that position. And then in 2023, deals with an injury that he misses the whole year. Transfers to South Carolina in 2024. Actually played a sneaky decent amount in the first half of the season before going down with an injury against Missouri. I look at Brady Hunt and say, one, he's still learning the position. He's still transforming his body from a 6'5", 200-pound quarterback to a 6'5", 250-pound tight end. Normally, we don't talk about fifth-year guys, breaking out, because normally it's like, hey, we kind of know if you're a good football player or not come year 5. Brady Hunt's got a little bit of a different background, which leads me to think he's an intriguing football player for South Carolina going into 2025. And then secondly, Michael Smith's going to miss spring. And so for a guy like Brady Hunt, who can be a legitimate red zone target for South Carolina, that excites me to kind of see what Brady Hunt can be for South Carolina in spring practice going into 2025 as a fifth-year senior. Don't get it twisted. I still think Michael Smith will be the guy at the tight end position, but this is an important position for South Carolina. We know Lenore Sellers likes to go to the tight end spot. Joshua Simon was the guy in this South Carolina passing attack. Now, that might change a little bit because the development of the wide receiver room is something I'm very excited about. You talk about Nick Harbor going into year 3. Nick Harbor not participating in track this spring, kind of pushing his chips into football. Mazeo Bennett going into year 2. You're bringing a ton of talent from the true freshman class and these wide receivers. I do think you'll probably see a little bit more reliance on the wide receiver position in the passing attack. Keep an eye on Brady Hunt during spring practice, especially in the red zone where you're South Carolina, you're kind of working your way to the top of the sport. The margins get small. One of the most important metrics that kind of separate good teams from great teams is, hey, what are you doing in the red zone? You coming away with 3 points or you scoring 7 points? Brady Hunt could be a guy that helps you score 7 points more consistently in 2025 as you get into the red area of the football field. Number 2, to me, something I feel very strongly about, and that is Tree kicking into guard. There's two different reasons for this, and we've talked about it, so I'll keep it short. One, I think Tree will be a better guard than he is tackle. That's not me getting up here and saying Tree can't play tackle. It's me looking at Tree and saying, hey, this is a guy that loves to play in a phone booth, has overwhelming power off the line of scrimmage. That's a guard to me. And then I think secondly, look, when you want to build your best possible offensive line, it is about getting your 5 best offensive linemen on the football field. Yeah, Tree probably can't start over Josiah Thompson going into 2025. Josiah Thompson might be one of the better tackles that we see in this conference going into 2025 with the way he played at the end of 2024. But, you have some guys that, Nick Sharp coming from Wake has played a lot of football, has played good football. I think Tree offers you a higher ceiling. I think he's a better guard than he is tackle, and I think he's certainly one of the best 5 offensive linemen that South Carolina has. And that's one of the things that intrigues me the most about South Carolina that nobody's talking about. Everybody wants to talk about Lenore Sellers. Nobody wants to talk about this offensive line being, one of those units that I'm sitting here in the middle of March looking at these SEC teams and saying, there's not many offensive lines I trust more than South Carolina going into 2025. Shane Beamer is finally reaping the rewards that all the effort that he put in recruiting blue chip guys on the offensive line. Tree, Josiah Thompson, Marky Anderson, Trevon Bott, all blue chip prospects coming out of high school that are now going into year 2, year 3 that can be really good football players, along with supplementing in the transfer portal, bringing in some guys that have played a lot. Boaz Stanley, Rodney Newsome, Nick Sharp. So offensive line is deep. So offensive line is good. And there's a lot of different combinations you could have up front that really lead me to believe this should be a good offensive line for South Carolina in the 2025 year. But you ask me, what does it look like, the best version of the South Carolina offensive line? To me, it's, you make no mistake about it, Tree is in your top 5 starting on the offensive line. Might not be a left tackle because Josiah Thompson is that guy, but I do think he'll be a really good guard too. Number three, going to the defensive side of the football. And this is kind of where we started, where it's like, all right, you lose guys like Kyle Kennard. You know you have a dog in Dylan Stewart, one of, if not the best edge rushers in the country. Keep an eye on two guys. Jalen Brown going into year two, a transfer from Missouri, and Desmond Yu. These are two guys that, go back to their high school profiles you knew weren't going to be year one difference makers. But now Desmond's going into year three. You got Jalen Brown going into year two. A ton of physical traits to both of these guys. It would not surprise me in the slightest to hear some really positive buzz, not only from one or really both of these guys. Coming out of spring practice, I feel like the conversation is all right, we only really have Dylan Stewart on the defensive line. I don't think that's going to be the case as South Carolina rolls through spring practice, because you have a lot of guys that, again, they're not proven contributors. They have not played a ton of football up until this point in their college football careers, but have the potential, that have the physical traits that you can't teach, to be really good football players for South Carolina in 2025. Jalen Brown, Desmond Yu, keep an eye on those two. Not only from a depth standpoint, but really from being like your legitimate difference makers on the South Carolina defensive line. Number four, Miles Norwood kicking a nickel. Jalen Kilgore, it sounds like, is going to make the move back to safety, which I think makes sense. He was kind of a safety coming out of high school. That's kind of where we thought he was going to play. I think this is why we saw South Carolina go out and add two names in the transfer portal at the cornerback spot. Two guys that not only are good cornerbacks in Miles Norwood and Brandon Sissy, but two guys that have experience playing nickel. We just found out a couple of days ago that Jalen Kilgore is going to make the move to safety. I'm sure Shane Beamer and this personnel staff were kind of planning on this once that season ended in 2024. All right, Nick Emenari is going to the league. We got to probably move Jalen Kilgore back to safety. Why did we bring in both Miles Norwood and Brandon Sissy? Because we plan on moving one of them to that nickel position. I think it's going to be Miles Norwood because I think Brandon Sissy is probably a better boundary cornerback. But I do think you're going to see a little bit of change in the back end, in a very similar conversation that we had with Tree moving into guard. When you're talking about guys in the secondary, and when you have the versatility that Jalen Kilgore gives you, and he's certainly one of your best five in the back end. We'll move him to safety. We think Miles Norwood is one of our best five. Well, we'll move him to nickel. Get your best football players on the football field. I think that's what you're going to see South Carolina try to do. And I think it's going to be Miles Norwood, but we'll kind of find out during spring practice. Obviously, some changes that need to be made in this depth chart. And then the biggest storyline is just evaluating the new names coming in on the defensive line. Brown Ludindy, Xavier Hardy, Devontae Miles. Are we good enough up there, or do we need to address that position in the portal? We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.